cursos de posgrado en el campo del diseño, de la moda y de las artes gráficas.
Así que durante estas 2 semanas de encuentro creativo van a poder encontrar tips y conocer acerca de las mejores universidades y institutos italianos. Van a poder conocer a embajadores, a ponentes que están trabajando en la industria, que son también académicos de estas universidades. La finalidad es que disfruten de Italia, que conozcan Italia a través de estos webinars y seminarios y que se aventuren a vivir en Italia y vivir una experiencia llena de conocimiento, de sabiduría y de diseño y de moda. Espero que lo disfruten y muchísimas gracias.
Pues muy buenos días. Hoy tenemos como invitado a Tim Power. Él es un arquitecto, diseñador, investigador. Ha fundado Tim Power Architects, de donde hace la práctica de arquitectura y diseño desde el año 2007. Tiene el objetivo de la convivencia entre la sociedad y el medio ambiente, pero ha trabajado en los estudios de arquitectos italianos como Ettore Sozzas, Super Studio de Cristiano Toraldo di Francia, colaboraciones con numerosos arquitectos y diseñadores japoneses, Nendo, Suo Fujimoto, Yunaoki, y ha estado en competencias pues, de renombre con paisajistas como Morphosis, SWA, West 8. Sus proyectos han sido desde vivienda social hasta entorno de lugares de trabajo, interiores para clientes que incluyen a Louis Vuitton, Muji, Lexus y Apple, así como proyectos en el campo de iluminación como Fontana Arte o Luce, Casina Interdecor. Ha hecho colaboraciones que se han presentado en la Bienal de Arquitectura, como en la Bienal de Arte de Venecia. Ha impartido cursos de diseño a nivel de tesis en una multitud de universidades. Académicamente, él investiga el diseño como acto responsable. Y estas investigaciones contemporáneas, ambientalmente curativas, investigan las estrategias que se aplican a paisajes urbanos para dinamizar la regeneración urbana, el espacio social, estimular el desarrollo de empresas económicas y enmarcar situaciones culturales con cuidado y optimismo. El tema de hoy es Exploring New Environments. Esto quiere decir explorando nuevos ambientes, y van a ser las relaciones entre Milán, la arquitectura, el diseño de interiores, el diseño industrial y la academia Domus, la Domus Academy. Entonces, sin más preámbulo, thank you very much, Team Power, for being with us, and you have the microphone. Thank you. You have no microphone yet.
Okay, my
now you're done.
Is working.
Yes,
thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much. I understood a bit of the introduction. My Spanish is quite limited, but thank you for introducing my background. I'm actually a new program leader at the Domus Academy. I've been working with Domus Academy for years, but recently started in this new role as the appointed leader of Urban Visions and Architecture program at the Domus Academy. And I'm quite honored to be entrusted with this role as a steward of sort of following the tradition of what the past program leaders have done, and following through with the tradition of sort of a great legend of education, global education. Over its 40-year history, advancing both the vision and a critical progressive slant toward the profession of design, Domus Academy has helped form highly regarded individuals and a globally recognized and respected collective approach. What I actually want to discuss today, and I apologize if I changed the title of my lecture at the last minute, but the title is actually changed to this words. Let me share the screen with you all. Multidisciplinary Milan is the new title of the lecture I'm going to give. As you can see from the slideshow, this term multidisciplinary Milan is quite important. A little bit of background on Domus Academy for those of you who don't know it. Despite its highly recognized brand value internationally, many people are unfamiliar with its background. Founded 40 years ago, 1982. Basically, the approach where process is considered more important than the results, and where human beings are placed as a central aspect of all and any projects. The founders of Domus Academy envisioned the students and faculty members from all over the world meeting to exchange ideas in a setting that would ask the Milanese design community, intellectuals, designers, and industry to contribute to the educational process by exploring real-world concerns. Now, one of the unique things about Domus Academy is the incredibly high level of professors and visiting professors and in-house staff. Of course, as Milan being a global design center, we're able to capitalize on having all of these leaders, design leaders and exploratory individuals be part of the system of Domus Academy. It's a very porous school. Leading designers such as Ettore Sozzas, Alessandro Mendini, Santa Chiara, Philip Stark, and a few others helped develop the recognition for innovation and its unconventional structure. These figures from the past, of course, have led to a new generation of figures, equally important, equally experimental. But I think the base of Domus Academy, the basis of Domus Academy, with these incredibly important figures, has remained over time. For some reason, my slideshow has stopped. Okay. I can stop it there. Domus Academy was actually founded by the Mazzocchi family, who are the owners and still the owners of Domus Magazine. Domus Magazine itself was founded by Joe Ponti in 1928. And the reason I mention this is the importance of Domus Magazine, probably something you all internationally recognize as probably still the leading journal. Now, Domus Academy and Domus Magazine are no longer in direct ownership, but there's still a lot of contamination between the two of them. And probably the largest level of contamination is this idea of a multidisciplinary approach. What do we mean when we talk about multidisciplinary approach? Well, it's something which is not necessarily unique only to Milan, but it's something that over the history of Milan, from its founders, the Domus Magazine, Joe Ponti, this very famous saying of his predecessor, Ernesto Rogers, saying that in any given day, a Milanese architect would design a fork and a spoon, an interior, and a building all in the same afternoon. And this remains true. In fact, this is the reason why I came to Milan, based on this very, very important notion of the mixing and blending and the cross-fertilization between different scales and from different procedures and from different approaches. In fact, Ettore Sozzas, who made this quote, "I make no special difference between architecture and design. They are two different stages of invention." And what he means by this is not only form, but he means the Italian approach, the Milanese approach, a very specific Milanese approach to architecture, design, and product as behavioral objects. They create and frame behavior in a very theatrical way. We all know that Milan in Italy is a very beautiful and very theatrical city, but design itself is not only form, but it's also sort of a background for the high qualities of Italian life. Now, a little bit of background, of course, in the early part of the century, Milanese design was already quite vibrant and quite internationally recognized for this cross-fertilization between design, product design, interior design, and architecture design. But it wasn't until after the First World War where that multidisciplinary approach became more commercialized and more international. It wasn't until that moment when Italy became, and Milan became the center, in fact, other than maybe Scandinavia and certain parts of America and Japan, but Milan was regarded as the center, the international center of design. When we talk about Milan and Domus Academy, we can't really separate them because the cross-fertilization and the influence of Domus Magazine, Domus Academy, and Milan have always been sort of open and fluid between the practicing architects, academics, and students. A few examples of quite well-known architecture: Joe Ponti, once again, the founder of Domus Magazine, the Pirelli Tower, which up until maybe 10 years ago, was 12 years ago, the tallest building in all of Europe. Milan is basically, for those of you who know or don't know Milan, it's a very human scale city, but there's also these majestic gestures of experimentation through its architecture. Now, Achilles Castiglione is probably a common name for many of the foreign product designers. Joe Ponti, of course, was also known for his product design and his interior architecture and his architecture, some of which are in Latin America, some of his most interesting architectural and interior projects also located in Latin America. I'm going to show you a little bit of a really brief video. Something to look at when we look at this video is, and I'll mention this a bit later, product design up until maybe 1980s was primarily covered by practicing architects. And this is one of the reasons why this idea of cross-fertilization was so interesting before the invention, let's say, of design schools, which Domus Academy was one of the first and one of the leading design schools to open with product design and interior design. But before that, all of the design elements and all the design objects, famous icons of Italian design, were designed by architects. So after the war, post-World War II, the rebuilding of the cities and factories which were destroyed during the war became a priority, not only in America and Italy, but of course across the world. In 1957, commercial jet travel was introduced, and new materials and technologies, many of which had been developed during wartime, helped to free design from tradition, allowing for increasingly abstract and sculptural aesthetics, as well as lower price for mass-produced objects. In an effort to revive the depressed post-war economy, Italian industry and designers made a self-conscious effort to establish themselves as leaders in a lucrative international marketplace. At the same time, in reaction to the perceived impersonality of mass production, an alternative group of artist designers were interested in keeping traditions of sculptural quality alive. By the mid-1970s, a radically transformed modern design expressed itself through a variety of idioms. There was a style for virtually every taste, from the bold forms and colors of art-inspired supergraphics to the refinement of innovation, production, and high technological molding. Studio craft movement, all the way to the pared-down industrial aesthetics of high-tech. The Italian design excitement and experimentation reached its apex in the 60s when a great number of high-quality and industrial objects were produced. Now, quickly following that moment in design history, this moment of radical design was introduced, starting basically in Florence, but also based in Milan. Radical design was an Italian architecture and design movement that had its start in 1966. As you can see in the text here, it was quite avant-garde in its direction, broke many traditions and questioned many of the standards of what good taste meant, right? I mean, it was sort of a time for massive experimentation. Groups like Super Studio, very famous for the Continuous Monument and the 12 Ideal Cities, Joe Colombo, Mangiarotti, Ettore Sozzas, who we mentioned previously, and other designers in Milan broke the rules. They challenged good taste, they challenged tradition, and they challenged actually a lot of the idioms upon which mass production and capitalistic production were based. Some of these movements became quite political. Some of these activities became quite festive. Of course, during the 1960s, as in Latin America, as in North America, also Europe sort of celebrated this idea of looking for some utopia, looking for freedom, looking for new ideas. And from that moment, from those very roots of, say, a radical approach of questioning tradition, came this idea, once again, of this multidisciplinary approach to design. So a lot of the people who we can see in some of these videos and some of these images, who were, let's say, trendsetters or early pioneers of experimental design, pioneers of radical design. Many of these people went on to found Domus Academy. Domus Academy itself was founded by, as I mentioned before, the founders and the owners of Domus Magazine, Mazzocchi, but also figures such as Alessandro Mendini, Andrea Branzi, Valerio Castelli, and a few others. These names might not be known to all of you. Some of them might be, but the base of this way of thinking radically changed and transformed the entire domestic landscape of Italian design. Radically transformed the way of thinking, the way of interacting with producers and in industry, and radically transformed the way of education. So in 1982, when the founders of Domus decided to open a new way of teaching, they broke quite a few rules as far as the pedagogical approach as well. And some of those roots and some of those base standards and some of those base methodologies of teaching remain at Domus Academy still today. But what does remain at Domus Academy today is the spirit of cross-fertilization between product design, interior design, and architectural design and urban design. These are just a few of the important figures who were founders and or important figures at the beginning of the Domus Academy, leading up to a few more contemporary designers, late 80s, early 90s. Philip Stark was a invited guest in teaching quite often at Domus Academy. Up until that time, there was basically or mostly Italian professors involved, mostly Italian thinkers. Milan being the center of design, it was quite obvious and quite evident that it would be Italian based. Sometime around the 90s, there began to be a little more influence from foreign designers, because this is the time when foreigners such as myself and other designers decided to move to Milan or to work in Milan. So people like Philip Stark began to teach there. Fabio Novembre, who's still quite active in Domus Academy. I chose this image of Fabio with his very festive Mexican painted famous chair that Fabio designed. And Patrizio Urquiola, who for many years led the mentorship of the Interior Academy. This is a very slow video, and I invite you to listen very carefully to some of the very subtle things she says.
The only way to grow, I think, is breaking your own prejudices. And one of them is the prejudice of being a woman. And it's been long for me to understand that I could have my own studio. But I think it was more a personal fight. At the end, the moment I opened the studio, even I was working with Piero Lisoni, and he was very funny and a nice gentleman, because he was saying to me, "Come on, Dai Patricia, you are ready, you can open." Because I think it was more than obvious that I was ready to open. Then it was more a personal thing. And then when I opened the studio, to be a woman, a man was not a big difference. I think it's the way you relate to the company, the way you can drive the process of any kind of project you want to do with a company, the way that you can communicate your personality to the company. The body is still being a woman's body. Something that gave me a big imprinting, I think possibly not only one piece, but the whole work of Castiglione was for me a big imprint. And then I think my work is very different, but as a fantasy. When I think about a product, I think more about the parcours, the path of someone work, no? Then Castiglione work was something. It's even a taboo. Like if in one of my projects some ideas come and relate to something from him, I stop immediately. I need continuously to break all the distance between what means my profession and my family life, or my private life. I've been fighting for a long time, discussing, convincing Alberto, which is my husband and my partner in the studio, to get a place that we could live and work all together. You know, like the idea of casa bottega, which is very classical Italian. And I always said, you know, I want like that. To have the laboratorio and the studio downstairs and have the house upstairs. And if there was a possibility to have a little garden of nature, a kind of patio, for us. I'm good in concentration, you know, then I don't mind about, and I like to have life around me. I live very well with all the studio, the little community. See, I like. I'm a community person, see.
And the word community in the last closing line of Patricia's introduction of where she lives and where she works, I think is quite important. This idea of community, she forced, or she pleaded, or she begged her husband, who's also her partner in business, to open the studio in the same building as where she lives. So breaking down these barriers between home, interior life. She's a product designer, but she also produces quite well-known architectural projects. This idea of community is not only relating to what her idea of community between her family and where she works and who she works with, but also the community with a very generous gesture to the entire design community of Milan. It's very common to run into friends and to run into designers in bars, in restaurants, in public places in Milan. There's a real strong community. And this idea that Domus Academy is a very porous, a very open campus, very open to foreigners, very open to guests, very open to leaders in all of these fields which are taught in Domus Academy. And this idea of porosity and openness is such an important part of what makes Domus Academy such a unique project and such a unique experiment in education, and a very successful experiment, if I may. Some of the work between architecture, interior design, and product design of Urquiola's work is quite available. She's one of the most leading figures in the Italian design scene. She has since left as program leader, but she still has a lot of relationships and activity with teaching and pedagogical experimentation with Domus Academy. Here's a few pictures of some other, let's say, alumni from Domus Academy, many of them quite well-known architects, product designers, and interiors, and almost all of them work across the field in a very multidisciplinary approach. Many interior architects or designers also do products and vice versa. This idea of product design, this idea of designing objects is not necessarily only formal, but also based on how people live, and this idea of cross-fertilization between the different scales of design, which is so unique to Milan, is also capitalized and accentuated in the Domus Academy. When I say traces, what does that mean? First of all, what does this mean 2000 to 2050? Well, I started the discussion talking about some of the past, let's say 1900s to 1950s, with the basis of the turn of the century influence of people like Piero Portaluppi, Joe Ponti, who were very, very strong believers and very strong proponents and activists in this idea of working across scale, working across disciplines. Recently, I was out with an architect friend from Portugal, and we were talking about Italy and Italian design and Italian architecture. And the point came up that probably Italy is the only country in the world where every century of the past 2,000 years, Italy has been sort of a cultural leader. From Roman times up until medieval times, through the Renaissance, of course, 18th century, 19th century, modernism, postmodernism, radical design. Italy has always been central somehow in this discussion. Of course, England, the United States, South America, Japan, many other parts of the world have been leaders at different stages. but Italy has this, this incredible capability of always being central to the cultural discussion of what's happening globally. And many people from almost everybody who I can name as an important figure in design or architecture come through Milan, and many of them come through Domus Academy. And that's probably why I accepted the appointment to become program leader, because it allows me also to invite my extensive network of friends to come through, but also to meet new people that I have not had the chance to work with or meet. And I think this is probably one of the very few schools anywhere in the world that has that fluidity of introduction and connection between students and faculty. That very notion upon which Domus Academy was founded still rings true today. Now I'm going to show just really quickly some, just a sort of a carolata, we say, of some different work from alumni and professors of the Domus Academy, Christophe Piet, Gordon Guglielmi, publications by Professor at Domus, professors at Domus's work, ex-students and professors at Domus. The design leader, actually the architecture and the interior design leader of Louis Vuitton are both Domus Academy graduates. So, you know, all of the work we see from Louis Vuitton, not only in their installations, but also in their architectural work, material research, interior design products, architecture of Vincent van Duysen, interiors by van Duysen, interior architecture and architectural program leader, Domus Academy, graduates, so on and so forth. A lot of very important figures, Nick Bewick, who's a partner with Michele De Lucchi, some of his research and work on the earthworks projects. I believe De Lucchi's in Mexico City right now. Perhaps he's also speaking at your event. Now, I'm going to share with you another very important project, which it's kind of a slow video, so I'll give a few points over the top of it. It was a project from 1994 by Andrea Branzi. And why I'm showing this film is not only the importance of the research done at Domus Academy with professors and students working together for Philips from Holland, but the influence and the incredible long-reaching visions of certain projects which continue to form and inform not only global research academically, but actually what's being built, not only in Milan, but all across the world. This very project is probably the most influential architectural planning project of the last 20 years. And it's in almost every history book on urban planning and agricultural planning. It's a very simple project, but I'll explain a bit later where some of this influence has led in the project. So this project by Andrea Branzi, who was born and educated in Florence, came to international visibility in the mid-60s as a member of Artisan. He is well known for projects such as Non-Stop City. He's well known for projects such as Non-Stop City, Artisan Vision in Urbanism and Continuous Mobility, Fluidity and Flux. Although widely perceived as a satire of Archigram, No Stop City was really more an exploration of a kind of degree zero urbanization, an urbanization without qualities. A generation of contemporary urbanists, ranging from Stan Allen in the United States, from James Corner, field operations located in Philadelphia and New York, to Alex Wall, to Alejandro Zeropolo, has drawn from Branzi's intellectual commitments. Still more recently, Dogma's Stop City project directly references Branzi's use of non-figurative urban projection as a kind of social and political critique. Just as he influenced younger designers, Branzi himself was influenced by leading post-war thinkers in his focus on urban design and social critique. In Agronica, he illustrates the relentless horizontal spread of capital across thinly settled territory and the resulting weak urbanization that neoliberal economics has enabled. commissioned by Philips Electronics, and created in association with the Domus Academy Research Institution. Branzi co-founded in the 80s. Agronica explores the potential relationship among agricultural and energy production. New versions of post-Fordist industrialism and the cultures of consumption they produce. More recently, Branzi extended this work in a project in Eindhoven. Here too, he shows with typical wit that a territory for the new economy in which agriculture production shapes urban form. These and other discussions are currently being investigated at Domus Academy, and many of the large urban transformation projects within the city of Milan happening currently have been greatly influenced by this landmark project of Agronica. So as we can see from this work, it's a simple, well, simple is not the right word, it's a very complicated project. But when we talk about cross-fertilization between product design, between interior design, between architectural and urban design, this project perhaps sums up our recent global interest, more than interest, our global needs to understand the relationship between environment, ecological, and environmental concerns. So somehow this project, in many ways, this project created a base, a model for a new urban ecosystem, which is not only being explored in the United States, in South America, Central America, Japan, Asia, etc., but also all throughout Europe, and also very much so in Milan. So here's a couple projects inspired by that project, Agronica. In 2015, many of you perhaps came to Milan or knew that the World Expo was hosted in Milan. This project by Stefano Boeri and Herzog de Merun from Basel was the master plan for the entire World Expo project. Very, very heavily influenced in many ways, not formally only, but also as far as systems and closed circular economy ways of thinking for agriculture, incredibly influenced by the Agronica project by Branzi. Following the 2015 Expo, Milan boomed as far as an architectural center. Prior to 2015, Milan was known primarily for its interior and product work. Following 2015, Milan has become, let's say, one of the centers globally of architectural experimentation. Projects such as the Bosco Verticale by Stefano Boeri, other projects such as the Feltrinelli Foundation by Herzog de Merun, both responsible for the master plan of the Expo, both of who admit and discuss the direct relationship to Branzi's experimentation at Domus Academy. Bjarke Ingels, actually, new building started construction, I guess, a few months ago in Milan, another very experimental project. Bjarke will have some relationship with Domus, hopefully coming up in the near future. Shijima and Sana's project for the University of Bocconi campus, right down the street from where we are here at Domus. One of the most interesting and amazing projects, perhaps anywhere in the world, as far as architectural design and experimentation. This project is definitely becoming influential, not only for architectural community, but also for interior and product approach. There's some new publications coming out on that project quite soon from Domus magazine. Rem Koolhaas's Prado Foundation and its phenomenal project by OMA here in Milan, talks a lot about this urban transformation of using industrial artifacts, industrial archaeology, and weaving a more contemporary language within the architectural fabric of the industrial period. Once again, this project is probably one of the most notable and interesting museums in the world, contemporary art museums in the world. So we're talking now about not only mixing and matching and transforming between product design, interior design, architectural design, but we're also bleeding over into contemporary art worlds and urban environmentalism and urban planning, all to do with sort of a ecological approach. Starting now, but finishing in 2026, Milan will be hosting the Winter Olympics. This master plan by a collective group of architects, including SOM from the United States, Dello Scofidio, who everyone knows is the designers of the High Line in New York City, and Calorati and Italo Rota, who are also professors and involved with both NABA and Domus Academy, are involved in this new project. This is going to become the Olympic Village for the Olympic project in 2026, right down the road here from our campus. A new master plan for Scalo Ferrini, once again by OMA, talking very much about the same issues explored in Agronica and the territory for the new economy. These projects are undergoing transformation and undergoing construction currently in Milan. I believe Milan is perhaps one of the largest building sites, if we want to call it that, anywhere in Europe, with all of this new influx of foreign capital and foreign designers sort of leading the way, weaving this influence of an international approach with, let's say, the very European, the very Milanese approach of this multidisciplinary crossover. Kengo Kuma and his new net zero project here, also Milan, just around the corner, and a bunch of other projects which have a lot to do with this idea of urban planning and then with an ecological approach. So a lot of these projects, of course, some of them are done by people related to Domus, but many, for example, this one by Michele De Lucchi, many of these projects have, let's say, been strongly influenced by much of the research, not only happening in Domus Academy, but directly by the professors and students who have both taught and studied here in Domus Academy. So a few more points on this idea of multidisciplinary. Of course, we discussed earlier that Milan and its multidisciplinary approach and the influence and the cross-fertilization with Domus Academy. We have masters in product design, we have masters in urban vision and architectural design, and we have masters in interior and living design. Now, all of these programs are specifically oriented to different fields of study. This idea of crossover is not infinite. There is still an idea of a very, very unique and focused approach to someone who's chosen a master's in product design. They might choose, or they might have the opportunity to take a course where they're also studying interiors and or architecture and urban living, but of course they're focusing on the product design degree. So, you know, Domus Academy offers these 3 different programs. The students can apply to the master's program and gain accreditation through the Italian Ministry of Education. But a recent, let's call it sistership or brothership with Regent's University of London has been formulated. But this Domus Academy, together with the Regent's University, has allowed a unique opportunity to gain a double degree. So with one singular course of study here in Milan, students in all of these different three different master's programs can gain a degree which is recognized through the British system, which allows accreditation towards PhD studies or licensing as professionals across the world, but also a degree recognized by the Italian Ministry of Education, which is quite an interesting opportunity for foreigners to have this validation and accreditation across the globe. I think this is quite unique, and it's something that's just starting this year. We're really, really excited about what's happening with this program, and the students who are coming in are really excelling. You know, after this moment of lockdown with COVID, which we're finally slowly coming out of, as you are, I believe, also in Mexico City. The students are back on campus. Everyone is really happy to be back and face to face with the professors. And we see this energy of the students sort of exuding interest in this new program, this dual degree program. So it's something I think to be considered. I'm personally really looking forward to having this elongated course of study, also allowing us to have access to more and more professionals and academics who do move through the campus here at Milan. So that's basically, it's basically a very quick rundown of what Domus Academy for me, and I believe historically has been known for, is this idea of cross profession, across multidisciplinary fertilization, and where that, let's say, industrial thinking in past years is now leading most of the student course of study, or a large part of the student course of study, to approach some of the global problems of, I don't want to use the word sustainability, even though that's a very good word, but let's call it a responsible approach to producing products and interior spaces and cities and the buildings and all of the systems which are part of this large urban ecosystem towards some sort of a more responsible future. So that's basically the introduction that I would like to share with, or pleased to share with the students and young professionals following this program. And I would be really happy to answer any questions or have any discussions with you guys. You know, it's funny, I'm also a North American, or I'm also an American, let's say. I'm from California, from the United States, but I've been in Milan now for 30 years. So I feel quite Milanese in many ways, but of course have my American roots. And I find that Milan is an incredibly open and dynamic city for foreigners. I understand sort of where you guys are coming from. You know, this idea of traveling across the world to a European capital such as Milan and to the design capital is so exciting. So I would love to share some of my experiences or answer any of the questions that any of you may have.
Thank you so much, Tim. I'm Arturo. I'm filling up for Gustavo here. Thank you so much. I think it's really interesting presentation. And I have a question before going on to reading the questions of the crowd. You know, as an American yourself, you know, the rest of the presentations we have had come from creatives from Italy, you know? So you being American and having, you know, this different perspective, what do you think are the values to highlight from the idea of Italian design and architecture?
What are the values that can be highlighted from Italian design architecture? Absolutely the very humanistic approach. Absolutely the fact that things are designed and built to increase the quality of life. It's not necessarily an approach which is technologically based, even though technology in research is a big part. I mean, many of the world's leading researchers in technology come from Italy. Italy is an incredibly fertile intellectual breeding ground, but it's always related to real human basic concerns. And I think this is something that young people are very aware of. You know, 30 or 40 or 50 years ago, we were all very much in love with the idea of the future, whatever the future meant. And now I think a lot of young people are quite concerned about what's happening presently. You know, of course, the future will be born from what's happening in our research and our approach. But we're very aware of some of the damage that we have, and no one's responsible personally, but as a society, some of the damage that some of our technologies and some of our advancements have created. So, you know, I think the Italian approach is quite curative, if I could use that word. Something that responsibly looks at what we're doing and how it actually can improve not only our lives and our professions, but somehow our relationships with other people, our relationships with different species, our relationship with the planet, if might be so broad thinking, but always thinking of things on a very intimate scale. You know, it's a very intimate place, Italy.
Yeah, let me switch to Spanish to encourage them to ask some questions. Chicos, tenemos un experto en el tema. Creo que es una oportunidad única en la vida y que es irrepetible. Entonces, los incito a que se unan a la conversación, dejen sus preguntas en el chat y nosotros con gusto las vamos a hacer a Tim. Digo, su presentación es más que clara y digo yo, la verdad no tengo dudas después de verla, pero cualquier duda que tengan, comentario o alguna intriga que tengan acerca de cómo es el sistema en Domus, por favor escríbanla y nosotros con gusto la haremos en el chat. So Tim, while we get some of the questions, I think it's really interesting that, you know, because we always are looking to, as you stated, we sometimes look for the future, for future references. We're currently living in the present, you know, seeing what are the current needs to, you know, to include them in what design can help us or can help us satisfy those needs. But, you know, we also look at the past sometimes. And what's really interesting is to see the evolution, you know, from Domus, the Domus magazine to the Domus Academy, and how it's, you know, it's the evolution of a system of or an idea of design. What do you think are, you know, the elements from the past that Domus Academy still carries out today, you know, from Domus Academy and all these incredible creators that you mentioned in the evolution?
Yes, Arturo, I mean, I 100% agree that the importance of building upon a legacy. You know, we have this incredible legacy at Domus Academy, and we don't plan on, you know, getting caught up or stuck in the past, but there's so much that we can learn from all of the experiments and all of the research that's been done. Absolutely, it's still a very vital part of what we're working on and what we're researching and experimenting with. So the past is incredibly important to not only what's happening in Domus, but let's say what's happening in Milan and Italy in general. When we talk about, you know, trying to work with present and current conditions, if I could sum it up quite briefly with 3 words, what we're looking at, what we're researching, and I think, you know, certainly we're working on environmental concerns. You know, the environment is a very important part of design all across the scales, right? From product design through interior design to architectural and urban design. But we're also concentrating a lot on social issues. You know, a lot of young people have real concerns about, you know, the future of their economic well-being, gender and racial issues, immigration issues, you know, the social issues which we're facing today. And the dynamic world that we're living in has certainly increased a lot of opportunity, but has created a little bit of tension at times. So one of the things we look at are how design, and we don't like to use the word solve problems. It sounds a bit, you know, overly optimistic, but this idea of responding to problems or somehow studying and trying to improve certain things without, you know, totally being able to solve the world's biggest problems. These social and environmental issues are key. A third one is cultural issues. When we talk about cultural issues, we're talking about this idea of global and local traditions and talking about the past. You know, we all come from somewhere. We all have mothers and fathers. We all have brothers and sisters. We're all going to have children, not all of us, but many of us. As a race, we will, or as a species, we will. So this idea of, you know, continuity, of protection of our cultural values, and how are we international? How are we responding to, let's say, an international design language, but also protecting and promoting many of the beautiful local values and local materials and local traditions be them, food, fashion, design, architecture, language, habits, all these things which are so important, which distinguishes Mexico from Costa Rica, from Peru, from United States, and from Italy. We're really interested in trying to find this balance. There's no right or wrong answer, but find this balance between protection of local values and promotion of sort of a global advancement of certain ideas, which progressive ideas, which hopefully can lead to happiness in some way, if I can use that silly word, happiness, well-being, whatever that means.
Yeah, as you stated, it's not about like solving huge problems, but fulfilling needs or helping in
Well,
some
yeah,
aspects.
solving problems is solving problems, as you say, Arturo, is not something that's an easy challenge. It's not an easy thing. So we like to use the word sort of responding. This word responsible, responding to problems, applying strategies to make change. To make some changes. Through design and through beauty. We talk a lot about our concerns, but we also, of course, we're visual people, and we do respond to beauty, for sure.
Yeah, so in contrast to my question, which was about legacy and the past, Cristina Romo asked, what do you think the pandemic made to present thinking, and what do you think it will be the repercussion? I mean, we have a generation that is growing inside homes, and they will have many new perspectives about space.
Absolutely. The last few years, many of the students have been working on projects which are not only specific to the pandemic, but also specific to some of the challenges that the pandemic sort of put into motion were actually already part of our lifestyles, or already part of our cultural contemporary condition before the pandemic. I mean, many people live alone, many people live in isolation. And this idea of how do we live together? How do we share space while also being isolated as we were in the pandemic? This slowing down, this opportunity which the pandemic allowed us, if we could say in a positive sense. Of course, it was and is a terrible phenomenon, but if we can learn something from current conditions, then we should take them as a positive attribution. There's been a lot of studies by the students on projects responding to that issue, and there's no clear-cut answer, right? But there is lots of different strategies and speculations that the students investigated, which even post-pandemic, I think will be able to be applied to our living environments to create community, as Patricia Urquiola said in her short talk about how she builds community through her studio. How do we build community even when we're alone, even when we're isolated? It's a great question. It's a big question, and it's something that we're definitely looking at.
Yeah, the research is still going, right? So
yes, absolutely.
Jimena Vasquez asked how big is the influence that creatives from foreign places have had in Italy, in the idea of Italian design, and also if you think that Italy being and Rome and Milan being one of the biggest cities in the world that attract people from all over the world, that if this influence from diverse cultures and different creatives has helped build, how rich its idea of design is.
That's quite a good question. And in fact, probably until the 1980s, there were very few foreign architects or designers practicing or working with Italian industry. It was mostly, of course, a local team of architects and designers who were designing and producing almost all of the work being done in Italy. Since the 80s, there's been an opening to foreign influence. There's quite a few foreigners now in Milan, quite a few. Not only students, but also practicing architects, practicing designers. Many of the Domus Academy students who have gone on to great success still work with Italian companies. And there's been quite a long list of Domus Academy graduates who, as foreigners, who decided to stay or to return home and continue working with the Italian with the Italian economy, let's say. I see that this is a trend that's sort of continuing to grow. Of course, the tradition, like I said before, this notion of maintaining the heritage and the legacy is very important. So most of us who come, or most of you who will be coming, or other foreigners who come to Milan, it takes a while to sort of understand the fluidity and the dynamics. It's an incredibly fluid way of working. It's really hard to explain. You have to sort of live it and understand it through experiencing it, right? But to answer the question more specifically, this trend of foreign influence is growing quite rapidly. There's a lot of companies, fashion companies, of course, design companies, architectural projects being designed by foreigners now in Milan and in Italy.
So another question by Livier San Martin, and he asked, which masters would you recommend to an industrial designer student, thinking maybe on future trends?
Oh, that's a tough question to answer. I mean, it's so hard to give one specific or even 10 specific masters. I think there's masters in every country, everywhere across the world. If I was to say a list of 10, maybe half of them would be Italian, maybe, but there would probably be 1 or 2 Japanese masters. There would probably be 1 or 2 North European masters. There'd probably be 1 North American master, actually 2 North American masters. One of them, Luis Barragan, would definitely be one of the masters. So, in Mexico, you have a master of architecture. Of course, Barragan did not work with the multidisciplinary approach that is so famous here in Milan. I always suggest looking to individuals who sort of worked across different scale and who worked across different, many of the people I mentioned in my previous lecture, but also, it's not unique to Italy. There are, people like Charles and Ray Eames in North America, certain people in North Europe, and certainly in Brazil, certainly in Chile, certainly in Mexico, throughout South America and Central and North America. There's some amazing designers and architects. But Italy still, it sort of has this, all of these people somehow come through Milan, which is, I suppose it's why I'm still here. The fact that I don't have to go everywhere because everyone comes here at some point.
Yeah, especially, and you mentioned, even if I had to name like 10 masters, I will give 6 or 5 from Italy. And since Encuentro Creativo is based around, Italy, I don't know if you can maybe name a couple of them, or one or 2.
Okay, so let's start with the pre-war. Let's say Joe Ponti, definitely the founder of Domus magazine, should be recognized. And Franco Albini is a bit later, certainly a modern master. After the war, let's of course recognize Achilles Castiglione, perhaps Joe Colombo, certainly Ettore Sozzas and Andrea Branzi. And today's current, it's a little hard to name current people who I would recommend because many of them are friends and many of them are my colleagues. So I don't want to give precedence of one over the other, but many of them live and work in Milan. So let's say there's a couple current young masters who I could name, but I won't, just to be democratic. But they all work or come through Milan quite frequently. English, French, Italian, but most of the production of their work is done here in Milan.
So we have another question. I know we're like, we have extended so much, but can I ask you another question?
Absolutely. I'm happy to stay as long as you guys, as long as you want. I'm sure you have lunch to go to as well.
So Alejandro Cerón asked, from your perspective, what will be like the 3 key points in the creation of a space in contemporary times?
The tricky part of a space in contemporary
In contemporary times, you know, what are the three key elements or key points that one has to take into consideration when designing spaces in our era?
Clarity of idea, clarity and conviction of idea is always the trickiest part. You know, learning how to balance and choose priorities of what a project needs to respond to is always key. You know, as designers and architects, we always think that building, the more we do, the better we are. In fact, one of the trickiest parts is knowing when to stop, knowing how to dose your work, knowing what not to build, knowing what to protect, and what to maintain in our cities, and in our houses and in our products. So that's quite tricky of learning or understanding our limitations, and also what's very tricky, and it gets easier, I guarantee you all, but dealing with, you know, the economic factor and the practical factor, which are clients, learning to communicate to the clients and convincing clients perhaps ideas that they didn't preconceive when they came to you. You know, convincing clients that there is a way to address their problems of, you know, increasing production or making money sometimes is, you know, a priority for clients, but also convincing them and showing them and learning and teaching together, learning with them and teaching them that all of these qualities that we mentioned, things like environmental protection and social concerns and cultural values, can also be economically feasible.
It's so funny because, you know, we have had webinars with creatives from fashion, you know, furniture, buildings, and that the second point you mentioned, you know, to know when to stop. It's a common, you know, reference in the fashion world, and, you know, too much accessories, too much fabric, too much material. But imagine that in like in a building, you know, in architecture, it's such a big difference, you know, to keep adding stuff on, because, you know, the size of the product, of the materials and all of that.
Yeah, you know, so mentioning, you know, masters. So I was very, very fortunate to work both with Super Studio and Ettore Sozzas, certainly two of the most important figures in Italian design for the last 50 years, certainly. But I never, let's say, tried to emulate their style or try to use their language. I always tried to create my own language. My personal concerns are perhaps more environmental than either one of these studios were looking at the time, even though they were both incredibly concerned about that. So rather than copying styles of masters, I would say, or predecessors, high quality predecessors, I try to take away some of the lessons, some of the conceptual or let's say attitude. I love that word, attitude. You know, what was the attitude of these figures? And one of the things that Sozzas sticks in my mind, and this is going to offend some people, but, you know, Ettore didn't always love professionalists. He loved humanists. And when you talk about what Italian design represents, it's a very human touch. You know? So he would say sometimes, you know, do you love your profession, or do you love your planet? Which is more important? Do you want to build because you want to be a professional, or do you want to build just enough to integrate and to coexist with planetary systems, you know? So it's knowing when to stop, is not when to stop, but knowing how to find that balance, let's say, is so important.
Well, thank you so much, because, you know, we have had different webinars and on different topics, and I think all the people who are currently on this live in this conversation are very interested in architecture, interiorism, design, and your class was just like a master class. So thank you so much for.
Thank you, Arturo. I'm really happy to be here with all of you guys today. I wish all of you guys a fantastic day and a fantastic lunch. Please enjoy some good Mexican food for me. You know, as a Californian, I really miss good Mexican food. So think about me when you're taking your break. But anyways, I appreciate all of you joining, and I really enjoy these experiences. And thank you all for spending some time with us.
Now, team, would you stop sharing screen so I can share a video and just give a brief message at the end?
Yep, absolutely. So thanks again, Arturo, and goodbye, everybody, okay?
Bueno, chicos, pues muchísimas gracias a todos los que asistieron. In the chat, everyone saying your conference was incredible. They're saying thank you for the webinar and all of that. So now I'm going to give the word to my friend Valentina, who is going to say a message. Your microphone is off, Valentina.
Sorry.
Hola, hola.
Creo que Fari va a cerrar.
Sí, logré. Okay. Muchísimas gracias, team. I'm the director of the Italian Chamber. Thank you so much for your presentation and also to Domus for being part of this Encuentro Creativo. Muchísimas gracias a todos por seguir con Encuentro Creativo en este quinto día. Todavía nos falta una semana. Por ahí, obviamente, la Universidad Domus, como ya lo hemos mencionado, está ofreciendo descuentos para sus posgrados el próximo año y como ya lo hemos recordado, pues acérquense a nosotros porque somos la conexión con todas estas universidades. La verdad que la presentación estuvo muy interesante y esta es siempre se suman muchas razones más por qué ir a estudiar a Italia y en este caso a Milán, con esta perspectiva, sabiendo que Milán es la cuna de la moda, del diseño y donde pues se encuentra un ambiente multidisciplinario. Entonces, qué mejor que ir a una ciudad como esta y a estudiar en una de estas universidades donde todo se está cocinando, ¿no? El futuro, como ayer lo habíamos platicado ya, ¿no? Que hay que pensar a futuro y hay que pensar estructuradamente. Entonces, pues los invitamos, por favor, a pedir más información. Muchísimas gracias por ser parte de Encuentro Creativo. Nos vemos el próximo lunes. Por favor, compartan estas actividades a sus compañeros. Están, obviamente, en nuestro canal de YouTube. Están las grabaciones. Y pues nada, quiero agradecer a todo el equipo de Trendo.mx, también al equipo de la Cámara Italiana por esta semana de arduo trabajo. Estamos muy contentos de terminar esta semana y que ustedes sean parte de Encuentro Creativo. Agradecer rápidamente a la Embajada de Italia y también a nuestros patrocinadores que pues ya hemos visto que han hecho algunas rifas y que bueno, son parte de este Encuentro Creativo que lo hace más italiano aún, ¿no? Gracias a Fénix, patrocinador de esta primera edición, a Zegna, Yamamá, Scavolini, Ferrero, Amoretti Brothers, Vialetti, Campari, Ferrari, San Pellegrino, Capricho, Secretos del Vino, Riedel y Grupo Berlingo y Alfa Parf por ser parte de Encuentro Creativo y nos vemos. Todavía queda un webinar más hoy, pero si no, nos vemos la próxima semana. Muchísimas gracias.